And I ended up later, while the boys were playing, watching this Elise Myers TikTok where she talks about like how she doesn't do things without anxiety. She just does things scared. And I burst into tears because like, that's what we're doing, right? Like that's what we do that's our approach to type 1 diabetes. That's our approach to travel. That's how we sort of get through this, is like, we just do it scared. And then eventually it becomes less scary because you figure it out.
Welcome to the Reclaim Your Rise podcast. My name is Lauren Bongiorno, nationally board certified health coach and founder and CEO of Risely Health, where we help people and families impacted by type 1 diabetes take ownership over their lives so that they can transform with more freedom and confidence. Everyone has a different reason to be here. You might be seeking knowledge, support, or community, but at your core, I know that you long for something deeper. You're here for transformation. And that's what the Reclaim Your Rise podcast is all about. A quick reminder before we start the show that nothing you hear on the Reclaim Your Rise podcast should be a substitute for personalized professional medical advice. Please always consult your physician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Hello everyone, Lauren here. So I just got back from an 11-day trip to Italy and Croatia with both my husband and my family, and it was absolutely incredible. I was planning on doing a solo episode when I got back on traveling and type 1 diabetes, but at the last second I called an audible and I decided to bring on today's guest instead, who you'll hear about in a moment. And I'm so happy that I did, because this conversation turned out to be 10 times better than I think what the original solo episode would have been. So my guest today is Lacey Weisbaum, who is an English teacher, mom to 3 boys under 10, one of whom was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes before his 2nd birthday, and an expat. So 1 year ago, she and her family moved to Italy from Chicago for her husband Brian's job, and they're learning now to live a slower, more intentional life, all while tackling parenthood, navigating T1D in a foreign country, and everyday craziness of the expat life. So this episode is not just for parents with T1D kids. This is a conversation truly anyone will find fascinating. We talk about the tactical things she and her husband had to consider diabetes-wise before making the move, traveling to 13 different countries over the past year and what that's entailed, the differences in health and wellness in Europe versus America that is really favorable to people living with type 1 diabetes, and the implications of testing family members to see if they have markers for T1D. So Lacey and her family were one of my early coaching clients back in 2016, and they'll always have a super special place in my heart for that reason. So I can't wait for you to get to know her better and her family's story through this episode. All right, without further ado, help me welcome my guest, Lacey Weisbaum, to the show, and let's rise. Lacey, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here with me today.
Hi, I'm so happy to see you. So excited to talk to you.
We've been talking so much on Instagram DM, especially that I just got back from Italy and Croatia, because you're over there for a year now.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to make this a solo episode, like a post-travel. And on a whim, I was like, you know what? This conversation would just be like so much better if I did it with you. So this was like 2 days ago, we made this come together. So it's going to be a great conversation. But I want to start out with the signature question I ask everybody, which is, can you share a story about a time that you've reclaimed your rise as a parent of a child with diabetes?
I have to be honest with you, I've been thinking about this. And I was talking to Brian about this, and I'm not so sure that there's like one story, because I think the decision to even do this is our reclaiming our rise. You know, Ethan was diagnosed, he was 20 months old, he was a baby. I was 8 months pregnant with my 2nd son. And we were like, is this it? Like, is this our life? It's just stressing about blood sugars and what we're going to eat and where we're going to go and how we're going to do this. And I remember the very first trip we took was to visit my brother and sister-in-law out in California. And we had an entire table worth of diabetes supplies that we took us for a 4-day trip. And we had, 4 boxes of Lancets, and we had 10 boxes of pods and so much insulin. And we were so anxious because we didn't know that we would be able to handle whatever came our way. And so just deciding that we were going to take this leap and move to Italy and know that we were going to be able to handle whatever came our way. That was sort of us reclaiming our rise, that to show Ethan, there is literally nothing you can't do. And you are going to have to plan for it, and you're going to have to think about it, but you are going to be able to figure it out, and it's not going to stop you no matter what. So it's not, I don't know, there's like a million little ways that we've reclaimed our rise, but the big one was just in the decision. When we first started telling people, they were like, but what about Ethan? But what about diabetes? But what about his medication? But and of course, those were all the first questions we talked about also, but it was never even a choice. It didn't even cross our minds that we weren't going to do it because he had type 1 diabetes.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of families that would hear, oh, moving from the suburbs of Chicago to Italy, families doing that. That's wild. I would never do that. And then you add diabetes on top of it, and it becomes so much of just what you said, the buts, but this, and what if this goes wrong? And what if that goes that? And really focusing on the limitations instead of the possibilities of what could be. So, and how old is he now?
He's gonna be 10 next month.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's scary, Lacey.
I know. 10. I don't know if you remember, but I texted you from the airport. I don't know if you remember that, as we were leaving to move to Italy. Like, we were literally in the airport lounge, and I was thinking of you, because there's no way we would have had the confidence or the skills to do something like this had we not worked with you. Because what the number one thing that I learned from my time working with you, and we were babies at the time, was that it wasn't about restriction. It was about a skill set. It was about being able to use a certain skill set that you could apply to any situation in order to make it work. And that was the reason that I felt like we were able to say, okay, we have a skill set. It's not, okay, he's not going to jump on trampolines at birthday parties, or he's going to skip the cake, or he's going to have one piece of pizza. And it was, no, we have a whole skill set of tools that we can apply to any situation. And so if we can do that in Chicago, why can't we do that in Italy? Because it wasn't about just the routine. It was about the skills,
Yeah. And I really, Lacey, I cannot believe how many years it's been, and how, how close I've remained with your family, because I mean, Ethan was what, two and a half when we, 2.5, you were one of my first, definitely first 5-10 clients, and definitely the first family that I ever worked with, and, have such a special place in my heart for you guys. And, before we get into all of the Italy things, I do want to stop and have you share about the experience of what Brian would do every year with Ethan, with the summits, because I think that's like a precursor for, or just like an example of how it wasn't like out of nowhere this Italy trip, or the moving to Italy happened. It was like there was things you were doing before, so many years leading up to this that set everybody up as a family into like, this is our family mission. This is our family model. This is how we do things with diabetes in this house.
That's true. Brian came across this peak. I don't know what the high point. It's like a high point. I don't know even what you call it, but basically you can go to the high point of every single state, and it's very cute. And some are very small. Like, you walk up to the one in Iowa, you walk up to the one in Illinois. And then some of them are really intense, of course, Colorado and Alaska and Washington. And Brian's like, okay, I want to show Ethan he could do anything with diabetes, physical, no matter what. We're going to go to the high point of every state. And before we moved, they had actually done 18 or 20 of them, the easy ones, but he started when he was 2 years old.
Wow.
And I actually remember the first one we did as a family, something had happened to his pod and we didn't realize it. And he was 400 and I called you crying from the car. And I was like, Lauren, we're trying to do this thing to show him, and he's crying and he doesn't feel good, and he's 400 and we got to change his pod. And I was thinking about that moment last summer. We just moved here and we were moving to Greece. We were going to Greece. And the ferries, if you've ever been to Greece, the ferries are it's chaos. It's like chaos built into the whole process. And on the last ferry, we had a car. So we had to drive onto the ferry, which is even more chaotic. And so as we're leaving, Brian is backing down the ferry, and we hear the dreaded Omnipod fail scream.
Oh my gosh. Like worst possible time.
Like, couldn't have imagined a worse time. And I actually have this really funny picture as we're driving in Greece, like backing down of, I've got the pot out on the dashboard and the insulin and the syringe, because he always gets an injection, as the pod warms up, and the alcohol swab and like all the things, because it was like, okay, here we are on this adventure, and now we've got the skills to handle it. But it was very funny seeing that. It felt like a full circle moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. It's like it doesn't matter what country you're in, where you are, like diabetes just it's gonna diabetes and you have to kind of
Yes.
be ready for it. But going back to what you were talking about before about how everybody was saying when you move to Italy, you can and what are you gonna do and how is this gonna work? What were those exact fears that came up for you and
Mm.
Brian, and really just not maybe even fears, but considerations, and how did you ultimately balance the scales and make the decision to say, you know what, this is something that we're going to do. We're going to move our family to Italy for a few years and we're doing it.
Okay, so the first one was the school, um, because his nurse in Chicago is just like, the school nurse is the best person, and she would stay late when Ethan had activities, even though that wasn't part of her job and no one had asked her to, and she was constantly getting up from her office to go to him, and we talked through a lot of the social emotional stuff about him not being pulled from class, so that meant she had to go and like manage a lot of that. And so we were really anxious about what that was going to look like um, at his international school. And so we called them and we were like, okay, we've got this kid. He's got type 1 diabetes. And honestly, it's a private school. We expected them to be like, sorry, like,
Right.
we can't manage that. And they were like, oh, we've got 5 other diabetic kids. Don't worry, we got this. And I was like, you're a 200-person school, preschool through 12th grade, and you got 5 other diabetic kids. And I think part of that is because a lot of Italian public schools do not have school nurses. And so if you have a type 1 diabetic child, like the parent has to go and manage that until the child's old enough to do that. And so a lot of diabetics will families send their kids to private school. So that was a big one. And the second one then was Omnipod 5, because we had been hearing for what, 18 months, it's next quarter, Q1 of next year, no, Q2, and then finally 10 days before we left, Omnipod 5 came out and was finally released. And I was like, I don't want to leave without it. Like, I want Omnipod 5 before we go, because I knew it was going to make it easier for him at school. And just in general, like with our traveling, whatever. So, you start making the phone calls, and the doctors have no idea, because I think they hadn't been fully briefed on when it was going to happen or what it was going to be about. And the pharmacies weren't carrying it, especially in those early days. And I saw a picture on Facebook from a woman that I know who lives near us, Pam, and she had a picture of like the box. And I called her and I was like, Pam, where did you get it? What do I do? And because this is the most amazing community ever and nobody gatekeeps and everybody helps, she's like, okay, here's what I did. There's a pharmacy in Springfield, Illinois that's, 4 hours from us. I don't even know how she found this specialty pharmacy, but she did. She's like, and you're going to call Nicole at the pharmacy, and here's her number, and you're going to tell her I sent you. And so we called, and she's like, I told her the story. And by the grace of God, this woman had a 4-year-old who was also a type 1 diabetic. So she moved mountains to find us a starter kit, literal mountains to find us a starter kit. She finally found one in like New York at a CVS. And now we're like moving prescriptions around, and I'm calling the endo, and they're like honestly a little bit annoyed because everyone and their mother is calling to get a prescription for Omnipod 5, and they had no idea how to manage they couldn't manage. It was unrealistic to expect them to manage it. And luckily our nurse, who knew we were under the gun and trying to leave, like wrote the prescription and helped us with all of it. But then it was with the insurance companies, and now we're back and forth with insurance, and we're changing from CVS to Walgreens and back to CVS, and so we were able 2 days before we left to get a supply of 6 months of Omnipods.
That's incredible. I mean, anybody who knows, like I was on the phone with insurance. My insurance just switched. I was on the call just like literally all day yesterday. And you probably were doing so much to get ready for the trip to Italy, just alone with your the 3 kids and the family, that like that on top of it was, you had a mission. You were like, we are not leaving the country.
I was on a mission. And honestly, this woman, Pam, who we're not even that close. It's not like we, talk all the time. And she spent so much time walking me through how to do this. And when we would come up with a problem, I would
Mm.
text her, hey, what do you think about this? She's try this. Okay, now try this. And the endo ended up being very helpful. But when we finally got it, like the thing in hand, the starter kit came to us, the endo was like, you're my first patient. And this is Lurie's
Right.
Children's Hospital of Chicago, which is like, one, I think maybe if not the biggest practice in Illinois for diabetic children. Like I don't know what else might be, but she was like, you're the first one we have. They basically sent us out a pamphlet. So we're kind of learning with you and, good luck. And then we moved.
And then you moved and you're like, well, hope this works out. So you went with 6 months of supplies. Okay, I want to talk about tactically. So tactically, what things did you have to do to set up for this move? Like, I'm even just thinking, like, how did you pack all the supplies? Like, how much luggage are you going over? Are you sending over a container? Like, what, like, logistics did you have to set into place?
I will say, and we have sort of acquaintances who are moving here from California. We moved with Brian's company. Like, this was a contract, and part of that contract is like they move us here. You know what I mean? They manage a lot of the logistics. They manage the visas. They manage the immigration stuff. They manage the packing, everything. And so a lot of that was made simpler. And these, acquaintances of ours who are moving here aren't moving with the company. And so their experience is very, very, very different. In fact, Italy, I was just reading, is like 28th out of 30th for expats because it's so difficult to move here. And I can't tell you, every time we have to go to the immigration office, it's called the Questura. Every time we have to go, you just see like lines of people crying as you walk out because it's so difficult. But basically we could choose, do you want to have a sea freight or do you want to have an air freight? If you have air freight, they shipped over 500 pounds, which is nothing. 500 pounds is nothing. And then with the airlines, we got 10 bags. And so basically we had to have everything in our bags. All the diabetes equipment had to be with us, like on the plane in a carry-on. So we had one carry-on suitcase, maybe even two, I don't remember. It was like 12 boxes of pods or however many it was. And I bought one of those insulin things on Amazon because we had like 9 vials of insulin or something coming with us. Our insurance gives you a one-time like vacation allotment where you can like double your prescription one time a year. And so that's what we did because we knew coming into it who our endo was going to be. But what we didn't know was how quickly we would be able to set up like an appointment and set up, get to the pharmacy. We didn't realize how easy it was going to be to do all of that kind of stuff. So we really didn't have to worry about supplies for a really long time. I brought skin tack. I brought alcohol swabs. Like I'm still using some of the stuff that we had brought with us because we wanted to be overly prepared. We didn't want to be scrambling for diabetes supplies. We scramble for anything else, but the diabetes supplies was really important to us.
Right. That was a priority. So, okay, you get to Italy. How do you find the endocrinologist? Was it like, did you go to multiple? Was there like one in your town that was the one to go to? What was that like?
So I have a guardian angel here. It's my neighbor. Her name is Kati, and her daughter has type 1 diabetes. And they go to our school.
Is she in Ethan's school? I was going to say, okay, so she's in the school.
Yeah, so Emma's in our school. A side note about Emma, she's 13 years old. I have never, ever, ever seen, and I'm a teacher, so I know a lot of 13-year-olds, and I've never seen anybody be so responsible with everything, and especially diabetes management. Like I can only hope that Ethan can use Emma as a role model. She knows her body. She knows when to turn off the pump. She knows how many carbs to give. Like she never goes away without her PDM. Like she's an amazing, amazing kid. But Emma's only been diagnosed now for 2 years. And so when we first got here, they were still sort of in their 1 year, franticness over type 1 diabetes. And so we like clung to each other, you know what I mean? Because we were new to Italy and they were still pretty new to type 1 diabetes. And the school really put us together with Kati because she's just the kind of person who will open her heart, open her home, do anything for anyone. And so she took us under her wing. She's like, here's your doctor, here's your pharmacy, here's your this. Do you want me to take you grocery shopping? What can I do? And so she really set us up with everything and made it super easy. So
Oh, that is
that's
such
how you,
a
if you're going to expat, you got to find yourself a person like that. And I will say the expat community is
yeah,
very similar to the diabetes community like that.
where it's very. But she's Italian,
She's
or
Hungarian,
oh, so
but
she's an
she lived in
expat as
Italy
well.
for a long time. She is,
Okay.
but she speaks fluent, beautiful Italian. Her daughter speaks
Mm.
fluent, beautiful Italian. Like they're just really amazing resources to have because they know it's like this information was just dumped in her head and she just knows everything and how to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's such an incredible thing for Ethan too, because I would imagine, all three of your kids are under, 10 and under. And so the boys
Yeah.
like probably had to adapt so much just to like the cultural changes. And then so for Ethan to have that grounded sense of, oh, this isn't like another thing where I'm coming in different. Like there's actually like people here like me. So does
Yes.
he like how is that impact on him meeting other type ones in Italy in his school?
It's sort of funny because I don't know if it's because he doesn't know any different.
Hmm.
He doesn't remember not being diabetic. He's not, he has very neutral feelings about having type 1 diabetes, which has been my goal all along. Like,
Hmm.
you don't need to celebrate having type 1 diabetes, but we've always sort of very consciously parented diabetes so that when he becomes a, adolescent teenager, that wasn't going to be his point of rebellion. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I wanted it to always just feel neutral to him. So he just feels very neutral about it. Like we were just on vacation in Spain, and there was a woman who had an Omnipod. And I was like, Ethan, look. He was like, okay.
He's like, we're out there,
I was like,
mom.
do you want to go talk to her? He's like, no.
He's like, stop embarrassing me, mom. Well, no,
A little
I
bit.
remember being in Chicago and coming to visit you guys. I was there for something else and I came to visit you. And we're sitting at the table. Ethan was probably what, like 5 then? Maybe I would
Yeah,
say like
yeah,
5.
yeah.
And he wanted a snack and we were all in the kitchen and he just took, out the fruit, just took out his pump. He was like, I think it should be this many. And it was
Yeah.
actually like really accurate and gave it. And I was just sitting there. I was like, he's gonna be good. Like you guys,
Yeah.
you're doing good with him. So,
Well, and thank you. It's very funny though, because the diabetes management here is very different.
ooh,
Very
tell me.
different. Um, so, the school has it. So you don't bring your own lunch to school. It's very Italian. Like even Italian public schools are like this. This isn't a private school thing. If you don't go home for lunch, then there is a chef at school who makes lunch every day. And so that poses its own sort of set of challenges for a diabetic child because if you're not, really solid with the carb counting, you can't just go through the line and where they're, dumping stuff. And so the way that it was managed at school, because there's, 5 kids, they have a lot of experience doing this, is you have to tell them a set number of carbs that
Oh,
you're eating every
wow.
day.
And then they reverse
And that
engineer and
becomes,
put it on your plate.
yes. Yes, which then sometimes you end up with this like really bizarre, like he'll have the most giant bowl of peaches that you've ever seen in your life. Or like, he's really not a huge fan of pesto pasta, but seems like he ends up with that every day. And so that, these ladies are amazing in the cafeteria. I think I just lost Bluetooth. These ladies are amazing in the cafeteria and they make him these beautiful meals, but it's not always what he wants to eat. And it's not always what, like the amount of food that he wants to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they stick to that sort of old school, you're eating 80 carbs for lunch. So every day you're going to eat 80 carbs for lunch. And I was like, Ethan, listen, you don't have to do that. You can go through the line and text me a picture. And he's like, Mom, we have 18 minutes to eat. I don't have time to send you a picture every day. So we're sort of starting to navigate that a little bit. Like, how can you eat what you want? And we don't have to go through the, that lunch line. So that's been sort of interesting. And then another really interesting thing is, the way we were trained at sort of all three, we went through 3 endos. I'm sure you remember. All 3 ketones were like a big deal. And if you're sick, you are checking ketones and you're measuring ketones. And so another diabetic acquaintance of ours got sick and she was throwing up. So the mom texted me and she was like, what do I do? And I was like, okay, you got to check ketones. Like she needs to eat. You need to, make sure that I would turn the pump down a little bit because you can have ketones and have a low blood sugar. So you need to make sure that she's not going low. She won't be able to eat. And then the ketones went up to like moderate. And I was like, listen, I think you should just call the endo, or like on the way towards high. I was like, I think you need to call the endo and just see what the endo thinks. Like if you don't have a sick day protocol, whatever. So the endo, who also has type 1 diabetes, by the way, I forgot to mention this to you, Art, the endo for like the Turin area has type 1 diabetes. He was like, what is your problem? He's like, she's sick. Of course she has ketones. When she feels better, the ketones will go away.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
He was like, she's fine. Everything's fine. And he wrote her a prescription for this like sort of an electrolyte, whatever. She took one. The ketones completely went away. It was no big deal. He was like, relax. And when my friend went to the pharmacy to pick this up, the woman also happened to be a type 1 diabetic. She's like, oh, but she's got ketones. The woman's like, what are you so worried about ketones for? She's like, the ketones are going to go away. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. So it's been very interesting to see the differences about, what are the things that we're worried about in the US? What are the things that they're worried about here? It's very different. Because I just remember like sick day management and ketones were like on this very short list of things we had to master before they would even let us leave the hospital. Like they would quiz us on ketone management and sick day management. And here they're like, yeah, she has ketones. She's sick. Like she's fine. If she feels really, really horrible, okay, go to the hospital.
Right. Like that's when. Yeah, it is very much, I mean, the European culture versus the US culture. We that's what we were really DMing on Instagram and texting about a lot last week, because there obviously maybe, in that instance in the US, people would still say, no, like, of course you want to watch out for DK and everything and be a little bit more adamant about, what's going on with your body or your child's body in those instances. But there's also a lot of things in European culture that I'm like, the US needs to adapt way more of that because it is just, it's incredible. So you saw that I posted on Instagram, I did that whole reel from the pasta making class that we did with my family. And I was talking about how much less insulin that I was using for certain foods there, and just like other things that we were doing in Europe that were just so synced up to like what my natural body needed. As somebody who has an Italian background, my dad speaks, decent Italian. And he always talks about like, if I'm eating at his house, like my parents' house in the US, he'll always say like, okay, like let's go for a passeggiata, which is in Italian. It's just like an after dinner or an after meal stroll. And so in Italy, we were just naturally doing that because, you're walking really everywhere when you go to dinner, and then you're just going for a nighttime. It's part of their culture of like, let's go walk after. And that's something that naturally, helps blood sugar. And then of course, back to the less insulin for the food, there's the ingredients. I mean, we were making pasta. It literally was water and durum flour. Like there wasn't even eggs in the pasta we're making. And it was absolutely delicious. And like tomato sauce that we made from like fresh. And I was counting, I think like for a bowl of pasta, I would have bowl is probably like 65 carbs, like 60 carbs in the US for a bowl, maybe of that size. I gave like 35 carbs for that bowl of pasta. So what differences have you noticed? And are those like the same, or what have you realized? This episode is brought to you by Omnipod. Many people don't know this, which is why we've partnered with Omnipod to help spread the word. But did you know that if you're curious about trying the Omnipod 5 tubeless wearable system, you can do so with no commitment, no obligation, and even if your current pump is in warranty? Crazy, right? Omnipod truly wants to make it as easy as possible for you to test our new system out and see how great life can be with it. There are so many benefits, my two highlights being that the activity feature sets a temporary higher target for times where less insulin is needed, and it integrates with Dexcom G6 to automatically adjust insulin every 5 minutes. So if you want to get on a pump for the first time, or if you want to have more freedom without a tubed pump, you can see if you're eligible for a free trial by going to omnipod.com/rise. Fill out the quick form and they'll do the work to check insurance coverage for you. You can also view full safety information, instructions for use, and trial terms and conditions at omnipod.com/rise. Now, right back to the show.
So it's been very interesting because Ethan is 9 going on 10, and his insulin to carb ratio has not changed since we left the US.
Okay.
Which to me is sort of fascinating because it should be changing, right? As he's getting bigger and growing. And so I think that speaks to a lot of what you're talking about with the insulin sensitivity, that the food and the relationship to exercise, which I don't know, I can only speak to the Italians that I know up north, but I don't know any Italians who like belong to a gym.
Yeah, no.
They're just always walking. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
my kids have recess 3 times a day. That is not what Ethan would be having in the US. You know what I mean? He would have like 20 minutes after lunch. And it's because here they believe it's not just like a physical, it's also like a mental clarity. You know what I mean? It's more than just getting your
Interesting.
movement in or like getting your steps in. They do not seem like obsessed with your steps, your movement. It's like you said, it's just sort of naturally part of their ethos. You know, it's not when they go for their passeggiata in the evening, like they're often doing it with a gelato. You know
Right,
what I
right,
mean?
right.
It's not like
Let's go
they're
burn off what
obsessed
we
with
ate.
calorie. Exactly. Like there's not that mentality at all. It's just they don't eat a lot of processed food. If
Mm-hmm.
you are eating non-home cooked food, you're eating at a restaurant. You're not having food delivered. There is an app for delivery. I've never heard of any Italians around here who knew what the app was. Like only the expats know what the app is. And partially it's because the food that you can get delivered is like awful because not a lot of reputable Italian restaurants are sending their food out to be delivered in the way
Right.
that like in the US you can get really good restaurants to deliver to you. You cannot have that here. So food is so much more than just like, you know, sort of the transactional experience that I think sometimes it is in the US. You know, like I have to eat, I need to get some calories, so I'm just going to eat something here. Like they have, especially up north where we are, they'll go to these 2-hour lunches. Brian said it was a really interesting thing at work because in the US he would grab lunch from the cafeteria, you know, snarf it down in 20 minutes sitting at his desk. If at his office in Italy he were to eat at his desk, it would be considered such taboo, like such an antisocial behavior. He would
Mm,
never even consider doing it. You know what I mean? And you
right.
don't eat in 20 minutes. You take an hour for lunch. You have a glass of wine, you have a beer, you know, it's not I think the food is so important to them that they don't eat a lot of processed food. They don't do delivery. Kids can sit for a 2 or 3 hour meal because that's just
Mm-hmm.
habitual. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm. And it.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so the quality of the food is so very different.
It is. And what I noticed is we were there for, I think, 11 days, and we did not, other than fruit, we did not snack or crave one thing like a snack food, like other than fruit, like in between meals. In between meals, if we
Yeah.
were eating, it was like a piece of bread with olive oil and like some cheese and like grapes that were on, the table. Or if when we were in Croatia at his parents' house, or in Italy, like I think it was like a plate of fruit that we would have ordered. Like it wasn't, there was not this like, oh, I want this bag of popcorn and chips and this candy and like things that you tend that are just so easily accessible to you in the US. Like it's not even, I mean, you can seek those things out, but it's like your body's not even craving it because I think you're giving your body what you need at those meals. Like one thing I noticed that was very kind of like glaring was the amount of olive oil that is used in everything, right? It's like it's doused on top of the salads and the cooked the pasta and this and this. And in the US, like olive oil, I think for some people is looked at like, oh, like it's high, very high fat, like let's only just put a little bit of it and like let's not like overuse it and let's limit. And I think what happens is we try to like limit on all these good things, whether it's the bread or the olive oil or grains or carbs, whatever it is. And what it does by nature is it makes us not be like satisfied, like our bodies don't get what it needs, and then we start looking for other places, and our instinct is go towards this like junk food and this processed food. So I'm coming back here and I'm telling Chris, like, as long as we can, let's just like keep living the Italian lifestyle. like let's just like eat exactly what we were eating there because we feel so good. And I was eating, so both of us were eating so much more there than we ate here. And I came
Yeah.
back and like, not that I weighed myself, but like all my clothes are loose on me. And Chris, he weighed himself at the gym. He's like, and he doesn't want to, of course he doesn't want to lose weight. He's like, oh, I'm down 7 pounds, damn it. Like, like he's so pissed. And he's like, I literally was having gelato every day. And I'm like, see, it's, it's the ingredients, it's the walking, it's the stress reduction as well.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, everything in my town closes from 1 to 4 o'clock.
Mm.
Everything.
Oh,
You cannot,
wow.
if you do not get your errands done by 12:30, you're done till 4 o'clock. There is nothing for you to do because everybody goes home. The streets are empty. And then at 4 o'clock, the streets sort of rush open again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to talk about stress reduction. But it's funny how you mentioned the olive oil, because I was at a grocery store, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. And, in the US, what do we have those anti-theft devices on in the grocery store, right? It's like expensive shampoo bottles or this on €8 bottles of olive oil, right? Like the whole olive oil section all had the anti-theft devices on it. I was just laughing so hard because like that's what they're worried about, people stealing in our town.
Yeah.
But I think you said something that triggered in my head. You said it's not accessible, and that is so true. Nothing about my life here is convenient. Like nothing. I think the infrastructure is built for relationship building, not for convenience. And so what I mean by that is, are there stores where you can go, like grocery stores where you can go get everything? Yes, but I have to drive to them, and the quality is awful. So if I want to get, like when I do my grocery shopping, I got to go to the butcher, I got to go to the fish guy, I have to go to the produce lady. These are all different stores throughout. So, am I really going to make an extra stop at like the grocer, because there's a separate grocer, to go buy processed food? No, I'm tired and my arms are heavy.
There's no Amazon
And
delivery
so-
of your grocery foods.
No, and there's no Whole Foods, right, where you can get like good quality everything in one place. That just doesn't exist where I live. And we're in a small town, I don't know, 20 minutes from Turin, which is not the most international of cities in Italy, for sure, touristy cities. But and the other piece of it is that when I go to the grocer and the butcher and the fish guy, and you're not picking your own produce, you're not picking your own meat. You have to talk to them and tell them what you want. I would like 5 oranges and I would like 6 apples. So it's really about building those relationships and having this community that's so much more important than the convenience. I can't imagine a scenario where they build a big like Whole Foods type grocery store here, because I don't think people would go to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They'd be like, we don't get it. Where's our butcher can't be here. But that's the US, and I think with capitalism, right? We've advanced so quickly in efficiency and in doing things, just like as fast as possible, because nobody has the time, or everybody wants to focus on work. Where in Europe, I noticed this most in Croatia. So Chris's dad, as you know, is from Croatia, and everybody who goes from the US, I feel like over there goes to Dubrovnik, which is like in the south, and it's like this big now kind of like more touristy place. His town is up north. It's about an hour out. No, about half an hour from Zadar, which is like the bigger town there. But it is like the town is called Glavenchi, and our last name is Glavin, right? It's like the entire town are his cousins, his aunt, his uncle, like everyone's related. And going from Italy to there, Italy, obviously we were staying in a hotel, more kind of like, vacationing, where there it felt like more like home. It was such a culture shock, because you really look at what everybody does in a day, and they do the same exact thing every day. They wake up, they eat together, they go, a little bit, maybe some of them go to work, some of them who, are just, off or whatever, they're more working, they're just doing the house stuff, they're doing the laundry, they're doing the, the gardening, the picking the fruits from the trees, they're swimming at the beach, they're swimming in the ocean, they're playing some kind of recreational thing at night. So for a lot of the men in the town, they do bocce, but it could be cards, like they do that. Then they eat, they have their meal, lunchtime, siesta, dinner time, and they're just talking and hanging out, and then there's music and there's dancing, and like they do that on repeat every single day. And it's so centered around those relationships and community that like if you look at, I don't know if we were talking about it or if I was talking about it with somebody else, but the Blue Zones, right? So the Blue Zone Project, they looked at what are the 7 healthiest places, like with the people who live the longest around the entire world. And they studied, what are they eating? What are they drinking? What are they doing? What are like all of these things? And the only commonality they could find, because everybody was on different diets, different amount of exercise, all of that, was community. And so we look at it from the US as like, oh, that's like slowing the process down. That's not as efficient if we just had it in Whole Foods or one place. But there's something to be said about how just dropping into somebody's house and, just sitting and being like, let's have some coffee together in the middle of the afternoon. And just this like very, very
Yeah.
slow pace of living. It's beautiful. It really is.
It is beautiful. And I will also say, though, coming from an American mentality and an American routine and American structure, that's been a really difficult transition for us.
Mm,
Like, it's one thing to do it on vacation for a couple of weeks, and then it's another thing to sort of live that. Um, Especially when you don't have, like Chris's family, right? They're all around. And so when you don't have your family here and
mm,
of course the expats sort of build that structure in, and they our expat friends have become like family to us. Um, but it's really hard to not fall into that, like, oh, but my kids aren't getting 90 minutes of math a day anymore, so we're going to be behind in math. And oh,
yeah.
they're not taking 5 extracurricular sports and activities anymore. And I see on social media my friends from home whose kids are doing football and cheerleading and baseball, and like, my kids don't have that here because kids are not enrolled in 100 extracurriculars.
Hmm.
Like, you got kids who are exceptional at sports, and then that sort of becomes their life. But unless you're that kid, you're not doing extracurricular activities. It's like, I'm sure there were kids when you went to go visit Chris's family, and they're just around all the time,
All the
right?
time.
Because right, they're not in chess club and student government and a million of those things, because that's not sort of what they value, is that kind of constant need for enrichment.
Mm. And it's a
But it's
balance.
really difficult. It is a balance for sure, but I think it's really hard to sort of break out of that. The biggest thing that I've noticed, and I've talked to some expat friends about this, is that in the US, the adults, we enter the kids' worlds, and that's a great thing, right? Like, the kids have all these activities and sports, and like, you're not a professional soccer player, but your life was enriched by having played soccer, right?
Hmm.
um, and we go to a million parks, and we have a million activities that we can take them to, and kids museums, whatever. That's not the case where I live in Italy. Like, the kids enter the adults' worlds, and they sit with us and they talk with us, and yeah, of course they go play, but they're playing within the context of an adult situation. So
Hmm.
that part's been really difficult actually to get used to. And I see value in both systems. I'm not sort of judging one as necessarily better than the other, but it is really difficult to come from that mentality and then live here. And it's like, I don't know what to do with my kids.
You're like, yeah, it's only so many times we can go to the beach today.
Well, right, right. Or, just it's like at the beginning, it was like, we were either on these fantastic, amazing adventures and cave swimming in Greece and sleeping, in like outdoors in the cold in Austria, or, paragliding in the Dolomites, or we're sitting at home, like, not knowing what to do. And
Right.
that's been a really sort of very up and down thing that we have to get used to. And so our goal for year 2 is to really lean into hobbies and like lean into our interests and things that we can do at home, so that it feels a little more organic, that we're not,
Mm.
everything's not being like planned and activitied up, but that our kids can sort of learn that, oh, this is what I like and this is what I can do, and I can learn how to be bored.
Mm. Yeah. So is that what you would say is next for the Weisbaum family? Like adventures and like under adventures and goals, you feel like you've traveled a lot within Europe the past year, and now it's more like how can we just anchor
Yes.
into, and I'll let you use your own words, but that's what it sounds like.
Yes, that is exactly what our goal for year 2 is. We went to 13 countries in one year, and some
Wow.
of them we went to multiple times, and so we've done so much, um, and then come home and been like, now what? So we sort of want to stop feeling like American travelers in
Mm.
Europe and really dig into that Italian life. You know what I mean? Like, dig into that. We've now made like built these lovely relationships where we can start to do more, like, hey, we're all going to hang out in the courtyard. Like, kids are going to bring a soccer ball and like kick a ball around in the courtyard for a while. It's
Right.
really difficult to go from living in the suburbs where you have a yard to living in an apartment where there's no grass anywhere nearby, and there are no parks for us nearby that aren't for kids 5 and under. And that seems like a pretty standard thing from what I'm understanding.
Mm.
Um, and so they have to learn how to like make their own fun and entertain themselves. So that's year 2. We're still going to travel. We're here for such a short time. It's only 3 years. Like, I can't believe we're already 1/3 done, but we really want to lean into our like home life and not just feel like travelers for year 2.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm excited to hear how that goes for you. Okay, Lacey, last question. I want to end on a diabetes note. So, a few
Yeah.
years ago, I remember you telling me that Brian got tested for the markers
Yes.
for type 1. And I think, I want to say it was like 5 years ago, but now I feel like my timeline is very often. It might have been like 8 years ago. But you had said, like, in the next couple of years, they said that he was going to develop type 1. So, can you share more about that test, and then also where he is in that?
Sure. So we did TrialNet. When we went to University of Chicago, we moved down to University of Chicago like pretty quickly after Ethan was diagnosed. And the doctor there was like one of the TrialNet, I don't, like leaders of the study. I'm not exactly sure. He was like, listen, we're doing this study. Would you mind doing it? You're really too old to come back positive, but like, would you just, we're like, sure, whatever. So Thanksgiving of that year, I think it was 7 years ago, could be 8. I'm not somewhere in that vicinity. He calls us on Thanksgiving Day. He's like, are you sitting down?
Oh
He's
my
like,
gosh.
Brian has, I don't know if it was 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4, something like that. He's got basically all the antibodies, and he will develop type 1 diabetes sometime within 3 to 5 years. That was the timeline. So, okay, now we've got this news, and it felt really heavy, to be honest with you. So heavy that we were like, we are not testing our other kids for TrialNet. Like, this is horrible to just sit around and wait for diabetes. And so the protocol from there became you're going to get a glucose tolerance test every 6 months, which he did, and all of them came back normal. And then he started getting calls from the University of Chicago. That's the benefit of like being at a great research hospital. And they were like, we have all these trials. Like, do you want to be in some of the trials? He was like, absolutely. So the first one was an oral insulin trial that he did. And I couldn't explain the details in a way that would make sense to anybody who knows anything about these things, because I was like, it all felt sort of very nebulous to me, but it was basically an oral insulin trial. And then they had him do the trial for this current med on the market that actually can delay onset. And I don't know, first of all, I don't know if he got a placebo or if he got the actual drug. I don't know if that played a role into why we're 7 or 8 years out and he still has normal glucose tolerance. I don't know if there's a genetic component playing in this, but no, he's still diabetes free. Like, he's still totally asymptomatic, I should say. I don't know if I could say diabetes free with the antibodies, but he's totally asymptomatic still. And actually, he hasn't even had a glucose tolerance test. Sometimes if he starts to feel weird, we're like, oh, go test your blood sugar.
Let's get the meter out.
But there's a lot of interesting feelings associated with that, because Ethan will say to him, like, Dad, I don't want you to get diabetes, but I wouldn't mind like not being alone with diabetes.
Aww.
So that's been sort of an interesting thing as we play along with it. Brian's uncle was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in his 50s. So I don't know if there's a genetic piece of this, like he's got the antibodies, but it's a real slow burn, or if it could be that he got the drug and that's delaying onset. I don't know. But yeah, we're just waiting.
That I'll randomly think about that sometimes and just be like, oh, like, I mean, I definitely would hear from Lacey if he got it, but I remember it being like, like in the next few years. And now I knew it was like longer than the term. So I was curious to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Let's wrap up with what is something that you would tell a family who has a child with diabetes who wants to live a life of adventure and travel? What do you think the most important thing is that they share with their child, or that they do to feel confident in order to do that?
I don't know if you follow Elise Myers on TikTok.
Yes, I love her.
I love her too. My first few weeks here were so scary. Like, this is not my personality to do something like this. Like, when we started telling, it's Brian's personality for sure. Like, he total wanderlust, loves to travel. This energizes him. He has no anxiety about it. It's like exciting for him. For me, when I agreed to like let him have this conversation with HR, to do this whole experience, it was only because I never thought in a million years it would happen. Like, so when it actually did happen, for me, I was like full of dread and anxiety. You know what I mean? And
You're
those
like,
first few weeks here were so hard and so exhausting mentally and emotionally. And then I like worked up the courage to take my kids to this bouncy house, like one of our first few weeks here.
yeah.
And I'm sitting there and they're bouncing away and, we have no idea what's going on because everything's in Italian and we're doing our best to just trying to like figure it out. And I'm like near tears. And I ended up later, while the boys were playing, watching this Elise Myers TikTok where she talks about like how she doesn't do things without anxiety. She just does things scared. And I burst into tears because like, that's what we're doing, right? Like, that's what we do that's our approach to type 1 diabetes. That's our approach to travel. That's how we sort of get through this, is like, we just do it scared. And then eventually it becomes less scary because you figure it out. But the truth is you can't wrap your diabetic kid in bubble wrap. You can't keep him from activities or sleepovers or the foods that he wants to eat. You just have to do it, and you do it scared, and then you figure it out.
So good, Lacey. It's that idea that sometimes we wait to feel confident or less scared or whatever it is in order to do the thing. And that's just, a lot of times then you just wait, not like waste life away, but maybe it never comes. And then you miss out on all these amazing opportunities that you could be having it by doing it first and then feeling the effect afterwards. So I'm so incredibly honored to know your family and to have like been on this ride with you guys and watching it from afar. Those kids, I mean, Max, Gabriel, and Ethan are going to be like the coolest kids when they're, when they're older. And I can't wait to see what they turn into. But thank you for coming and sharing your family's story. I know it's going to inspire so many. And just thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me today and listening to this episode of Reclaim Your Rise. To let us know that the episodes we're putting out are impactful and to help us get our street cred up and let everyone else know that this is something worthy of their time to listen to, please leave a rating and review on our Apple Podcast, send the show to other people impacted by T1D or maybe even your doctor, and share it on social media tagging @Risley Health and @Lauren_Bongiorno. New episodes of Reclaim Your Rise come out every single Tuesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so that you never miss a beat. Thanks again for listening, and as always, remember, diabetes is a challenge that we did not choose, but one that we can rise above.